Eddie, I suggest we move forward, but it would be great if a few other people want to turn their camera on so that we have the opportunity for a little bit personal first, and we'll get going with this. This is my holy daughter. Give me a thumbs up if you could see the picture of her. All right, so this is my daughter Adi. Adi is now 12. She just was bat mitzvahed, but this was a story that ran about her in our local paper here. I'll tell you a little bit about it. Essentially, Adi wanted to buy a pair of shoes from her favorite basketball player named Elena Deladan. Adi, my daughter's a basketball player, and Elena released a pair of shoes. For any of you athletes out there, not so common for women athletes to release a pair of signature shoes. So it was very exciting for her. And she went to a store to ask if they had the shoe. Unfortunately, the employee at the time must have been having a bad day. And he said to my daughter, "I'd rather watch paint dry on a wall than watch women's basketball." That was the wrong thing to say. He was a young guy. I don't think he was thinking. It was not the right comment. I escorted my kids out of the store, and I went back in and I said to the gentleman, customer service 101, next time a young lady walks into your store, don't tell her you'd rather watch paint dry than watch the thing that she most enjoys. Just not a smart move. Anyway, my daughter took a while and a lot of pain and a lot of tears, but my daughter ended up blogging about it, and it went viral, and it got picked up by newspapers and TV stations, and she's become a little celebrity. And the best part about it was that she's now impacted corporate change. The stores have been changing things up. She's been involved in executive level corporate meetings in a number of different sports stores, but also she's had the opportunity to come back to that store, and they gave her a number of gifts. They apologized. They bought her shoes and jerseys and basketballs. I guess it didn't look so good for them. But it's in addition to all that, they really sincerely apologized, and a lot of amazing things have come out of that experience for her, including she's had the chance to be on the Kelly Clarkson show and on Good Morning America and all of these things, and talking about, how we think about women in sports. But I share all that. And by the way, we're heading to the Smithsonian next week. They're collecting a pair of her basketball shoes and her story to put in as part of a upcoming exhibit on women in sports in America. Pretty cool. She's a great kid. She's only 12. I'm not sure how much she quite has grasped the significance, but it's been a really beautiful year for her. But the bottom line is, you can Google the story if you want to hear more. But the bottom line is, you don't have to put someone else down to lift yourself up. You don't have to say, "Oh, I'm into men's basketball. Let me just make fun of women's basketball, and that'll make me feel better." You don't have to do it. You can sympathize and enjoy and celebrate other people. And at the same time, it doesn't have to be your thing. You can do your thing. I think this is a huge parenting moment with my kids all the time. I think about my children and how sometimes they get on each other and put the other sibling down. And I'm reminding them, you don't have to make them feel bad in order to make yourself feel good, right? And we do this with friends. We do this with, as teaching moments. But as you said, kindness is key, right? And it ties into the topic I wanted to share with you today. I want to share some texts and study together. I want to share some approaches in my rabbinate, in my synagogue, the way this plays itself out, which is maybe unique to an Orthodox synagogue, maybe not, and share some other teachings that have really guided me in my rabbinate. For however long you can be on this call, great. If you need to step off, great too. It's all good. It's an honor just to be here and to share this teaching. It'll be recorded and can be shared if you feel comfortable. So my topic today comes from a book title, but it's "You Don't Have to Be Wrong for Me to Be Right." I think we can all internalize what that means. You don't have to be wrong for me to be right. And some of us might not agree with that statement, but I want to show how it's played out in my rabbinate, in my spiritual teachings, and I welcome your thoughts and feedback as we go through it. So I see Rav Shmuley, holy man, traveling to save the world. Thank you so much. Don't unmute yourself while you're driving, but it's good to see you. We'll connect later, okay? So I want to start with a poem which is close to my heart and will lead us into where we're going to be. Okay, so this is a poem by Yehuda Amichai. Maybe you've seen this poem before. It's called "The Place Where We Are Right," Min Makom Shebo Anu Tzotkim, where we think that we are righteous, where we are right. And it goes as follows: from the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, like a plow. And a whisper will be heard in the place where the house once stood that was ruined. Shebo haya habayit asher nechrav. Yehuda Amichai was an Israeli poet. Just let the word sit with you for a second. The last line of this poem was one of the reasons I chose it for today's learning, because we are just in the aftermath of Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, our national day of mourning, a day in which the Jewish people mourn the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. In this poem, I believe it's hinted to in the word habayit, the house, and the house can't stand when we are always standing firmly in a place that I am right. Marriages can't stand. Relationships can't stand. Religions, I think, will have a hard time standing in justice when it is always standing in a place where we are right. And so I'm thinking about the fact that we are in the aftermath of Tisha B'Av, 9th of Av, and the heavier implications of the concept of you don't have to be wrong in order for me to be right, the heavier implications of not putting someone else down to lift yourself up, the implications that it leads to death, to murder, to violence, to extremism, to fundamentalism. And this was the subject of a book of a colleague of mine, Rabbi Brad Hirschfield. Maybe you've seen the book before. The book is called "You Don't Have to Be Wrong for Me to Be Right." It's where I took my title from. And Brad he has a line in his introduction where he writes, "We live in a world where religion is killing more people than at any time since the Crusades." And it's heavy for Brad. Brad was inspired into the work that he does largely because of his own youth, in which he was a right-wing zealot in the Jewish world. He was in a community called Yamit in Israel, which was trying to settle new areas of Israel. And there was a particular day he references where assailants came to Yamit and they were chased down by he and his comrades. They were chasing after them. And the assailants fled into a school, and the Israelis fired into the school to get the assailants. And unfortunately, 2 Palestinian children were killed in the school. And the reaction that Rabbi Brad describes of his brothers in arms, his fellow Israelis, to him was overwhelmingly painful. the fact that this was a necessary evil, that it was collateral damage, that these children died. It's not our fault. He could tell you more about the story, but it reminds us about when we feel like we are so right, what we're willing to sacrifice and what we're willing to do, that could sometimes cause tremendous amount of pain. We see this in our own community. We make these mistakes when we are so right, and that means you are so wrong, and I might have to do a lot to prove that or to stand on those grounds. But we also see this, of course, as a Jewish community in the acts of violence that have been perpetrated against us. Just this past Sunday and Monday was the 27th anniversary of the bombing of the Amia Center in Buenos Aires, Argentina. If you're not familiar with it, it is the single largest massacre of Jewish life since the Shoah in the diaspora. It's horrific. Here is an image of Amia in the immediate aftermath of the bombing. Amia was the Jewish Community Center, social service agency. 85 people lost their lives in a truck bomb that went off in front of the building. Hundreds were injured when the building was completely flattened by the bomb. And to this day, no one has been held accountable for the attack. And the highest levels of power in the Argentinian government have been accused of being complicit and of a cover-up. A couple of years ago, Alberto Nisman was the federal prosecutor in Argentina, was found dead in his hotel room or in his home the night before he was to testify against the highest levels of the Argentinian government. No one believes it was an accident or what is claimed to be a suicide. And it's such a horrific tragedy that we're thinking about just now. I'm thinking about the fact that just yesterday, a guilty plea came in for John Earnest, who opened fire on the Poway Synagogue in California, killing Lori Gilbert Kay. John, who is a man who said the Jews are bringing about the destruction of this country. I'm right, they're wrong, they deserve to die. This is the kind of fundamentalism that comes when we are so convinced that we are right, and that in order for me to be right, you must be wrong. And if you're wrong, there could be serious implications in that. I want to pull back from issues of terrorism and turn it inwards a little bit. You know, the Baal Shem Tov, and then I'll pause for a minute, and if this is bringing up something for you, you know, please feel free to jump in. The Baal Shem Tov in our tradition teaches that whenever we see a flaw in someone else, whenever we see something that we believe is, you know, something lacking in the other, that perhaps it's because that very thing is lacking in ourselves. So I don't want today to be pointing fingers elsewhere. I want to be looking inwards and thinking about, as a community, you know, where can we do better? How can we as individuals do better when we think about the concept that you don't have to be wrong in order for me to be right? Where does that come up in our daily practice, in our daily living? Where can we push back against those intuitions and those ideas? And I want to show you a couple of places where it comes up for me. But before I do that, I just want to pause for a second. If there's any questions, or you can just raise your hand or unmute yourself or say anything you'd like anytime. And then I'll move forward if nobody else has any other thoughts. So I want to share two campaigns that I waged in my synagogue. I see that Debbie put a little comment about the vaccine in the chat. And yes, you know, the politics in our country, things that maybe shouldn't be political, things that are political, you know, have created such a place where I'm right, you're wrong, and therefore we can't have Thanksgiving dinner together. I'm right, you're wrong, we can't hang out at Kiddush any longer. I'm right, you're wrong, the rabbi better not speak about Paro today because it's going to be misinterpreted. And so, it's been a challenging time in our country for sure. And I think we need to find a way not to stand on those pedestals, because it doesn't allow us to come together as a community. And I want to speak about not only our Jewish community, but also our larger human community and the ways that this plays out. So I'll give you an example. In our service, we conclude every service with a prayer that's known as Aleinu. Maybe you're familiar with the prayer, Aleinu l'shabeach ladon hakol. The prayer actually has an edited line in the prayer that is in many prayer books, but has been edited out for hundreds of years because it created a lot of consternation with authorities and others who looked at the Jewish community and said, why are you praying against us? And that created tremendous divisions and pain. And so the Jewish community, in their infinite wisdom, decided to edit it out. But not every community, and many communities kept the line in, or they created a blank space in their Siddur. We have old Siddurim where there's a blank space where the line was, and you and I know what to fill in that spot. So this prayer, just show you a little snippet of it, so you can see it here on the screen, is called Hevel Varik. And it's in the Aleinu prayer. It's on the bracketed bold section here. And you say, Shehem mishtachavim lehevel varik. We're acknowledging our Creator. And we're also saying that everybody else, they prostrate themselves to vanity and nothingness and pray to a God they cannot deliver. We have this whole diatribe we go against other religions in the middle of our final prayer of the service. So this line was edited out, although some people still put it in. And more than that, if you go to some communities, when they recite this line, they spit onto the floor during the recitation of this line. I've been in synagogues like this. They wad up a chunk of spit in their mouth. They spit it out. Then they use their foot and sort of wipe it into the carpet or the floor. It's disgusting. And they go on. Some people do it awkwardly, so they spit too late. And so they're spitting on the line afterwards, which is, but we bow to God. Whoops, you spit too late, and that was really blasphemous. But as far back as the Shla Kadosh, one of the great holy rabbis in the 16th century, was imploring people, please stop spitting and please stop saying this line. It's not healthy for our community. We don't want to say this line. It just creates pain, hardship, division. You're doing it wrong anyway. You don't know what you're saying. And when I came to my synagogue here, where I am in Maryland, the practice of the synagogue was to say this line. It's in the prayer book, although it's generally in brackets. And I said, listen, I'm not so comfortable as a new rabbi saying this prayer. Rabbi, don't come here and change our prayers. So it was a campaign. I had to teach and educate and bring the sources and talk about it. And it was not simple for people. But ultimately, I don't want to invite this kind of language in our prayer space. And enough people understood that and came on board. And we decided to stop saying this line in the Aleinu, which is what many synagogues do today. They don't say this line. In fact, many prayer books and liberal prayer books don't even include this line. And this is just one example of how we can get away from, in order for me to be right, you must be wrong. You don't have to say that. Just say the things that you believe in, the things that are important to you. I'll share one other example, and then I'd love to hear from you if there's anything this is bringing up for you in other parts of religious life, spiritual life, things that, strike you as, yes, I wish we didn't do that, or I wonder if we could change this. So here's one other example that comes up in our synagogue. Again, I don't know that this is a challenge that every community faces, but in the standard, one of the standard Orthodox prayer books, the Art Scroll Siddur, There is a prayer for the welfare of the United States government. Beautiful. We pray for the government. It's fantastic. We should. We should be very grateful that we're living in a country where we can be free and where we have rights and where we're protected as a community. But this prayer, some argue, not everyone, but some argue, is actually a disingenuous prayer. And if you read through it, if you note the underlined passages, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. May he who gives salvation to kings and dominion to princes, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, who delivers his servant David from the evil sword, and makes a way in the sea and a path in the mighty waters, bless and protect this kingdom. That's the essential prayer. Now, I want to show you that, like most prayers in our tradition, they're actually rooted in texts. These words are taken from passages. So now see what passages they come from. If you could see the screen, I'll show you this, and happy to share this with anyone afterwards if it's too hard in the moment. Two of these passages come from Tehillim and the book of Yeshayahu. In Tehillim, here's that line. To you give victory to kings, who rescues his servant David from the deadly sword. Look at the very next line. Rescue me, save me from the hands of these foreigners whose mouths speak lies and whose oaths are false. Meaning, we hate this government. They're a bunch of liars. They don't tell us the truth. Save us from them. Or look at the next line from Yeshayahu. Okay, we quote the part about a road through the sea and a path through mighty waters. But what are we really saying? Please, God, you're the one that destroys their chariots and horses, right? Extinguish them like a wick. So these two examples are just simple examples of how a prayer that we say for the government, for you and I, who would know, of course, all of the scriptures by heart, when I say one line, I know that it's really about a larger statement of, yes, we hate the government. We don't trust the government. So it's almost like you're saying a line because you're worried that somebody might be listening. But you and I both know that we hate the government, and that's what we're really saying. And again, as a community, it concerns me that in order for me to feel good about my religious practice, in order for me to stand on my own 2 feet and be proud of who I am, I have to put down somebody else. I have to shame the government in that kind of ritual practice. Of course, there are moments where we protest, but this becomes ritualized. It's in the prayer book, it's printed, and it's just recited by rote everywhere. I've tried to convince certain prayer groups to stop using this prayer. There's many other prayers that have been written, but everyone's like, well, but it's in the prayer book. We don't change the liturgy. It wasn't written so long ago. And I'm wondering if it was written in the right spirit. These are two examples in my own synagogue that we lobbied to change, and we did, and that help us lead a healthier spiritual life where we're not just focused on our own, on other people and how they're wrong, but can stay focused on what's our own values and just shine that light into the world, right? You know, Reb Shmuley, I'm sure you could weigh in here too, and anybody else, about how this concept sort of plays, comes up for us in so many different ways in our lives. These are two simple examples in the synagogue that don't have the implications of an Amiyah bombing and a terrorist walking in because I know best. That's, thank God, the wrong prayer is not what's killing us in this moment. But sometimes it could. And I think it's important for us to recognize where this maxim might have really important significance. So before I move on and share with you a few other little Torahs that are close to my heart on this topic, Rav Shmuley and anybody else, feel free to jump in here.
Rav Uri, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, first of all, I'm sorry about my technical difficulties earlier. I was so excited to introduce you. I love learning from you. And so Yasher Koach, thanks for being here and for this awesome Torah that we need more than ever. And one question I have among so many is, I think most of your examples so far have been in the realm of speech. When we're talking about tefillah, Havov Arik and Aleinu, we're talking about how the Israeli soldiers speak, we're talking about the shoe salesman, we're talking about the American prayer. It's the realm of how we actually articulate something we believe. And I wonder, when you extend this to the realm of thought and you extend it to the realm of action, how if at all, it changes for you. For example, let's just take the Christianity and Islam example in Hevel Varik, or really any other religion. One might say, yes, I actually believe theologically those are false, but I don't need to say it. It's not nice to say it. I don't need to pray it. And then there's an action. I'm going to do my action, not their action. And there's a number of other cases kind of similar to that. So I wonder, like, when you extend this notion of articulation of truth in the both internally and in behavior, how you would reflect on that.
Yeah, well, you are the holy Rebbe of action, my friend. You know, I think about you so much, Shmuley, and how we make sure that these principles are acted in the right way. You know, it's funny. I think so often our words lead to action, and maybe that's why I'm starting in this place. That it impacts a great deal the way we talk about things and the words that we use, and then how people then will translate that. If I am thinking in my prayer that the only way I can praise God is to put you down, and then that leads to spitting, and you know, spitting is just one step from spitting in your face, and then I spit in your face, and that takes us down the wrong road. So I think this is maybe the root of some of these issues. But I will share a couple of examples where this comes up for me in some practical ways. Let me put that on hold for a second. We'll get to that in a few minutes. So, you know, where I've seen that in my own life. But good point, Reb Shmuley. Other thoughts, reactions, just things you want to bring up? I'll just share. Oh, go ahead, Rabbi Steve, go for it.
No, first of all, thank you for this. It's a great break from the crush of my otherwise managerial day to consider a little Torah. So there is a distinction, and I think that Shmuley was intimating it, is, you know, there is a challenge here between the dignity of and the aliveness of self-contradictory positions that are both right. In other words, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim is one of these, both these and those are the words of the living God, is true for Hillel and Shammai, and broadly true in lots of different frames. I like to teach that every Torah you teach has a shadow Torah whose opposite is also partially true, right? So that is one of the frames that you're aiming toward, but we all also know that conviction lies in certain moments in being strong in one's position and fighting what we think is really destructive. And so we don't say that about Holocaust denial. Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim. We don't say that about using violence to achieve political ends, you know, in certain frames. Like, you know, that, you know, we don't say that there were nice people on both sides, you know. So part of the challenge here is a discernment that is hard to make, to know whether elu ve'elu, a kind of patience with opposition, is called for, or whether you know, saving the planet, like the oil companies are not representing the interests of humanity. Do I say, listen, they don't have to be wrong for me to be right? I mean, like, then you understand the challenge here is the big one.
You're right. You know, like there are certain moments where it's life and death. I'm not elu ve'eluing this, right? I need to stand up. I feel like justice needs to happen. this is the activist spirit. We have to speak truth to power. These are our true ideals, and there are the ideals of every activist that needs to come to the fore. And activism has a critical place in order to move that needle and push that argument. I think part of what I'm looking to think about in this conversation is the reality that beyond the activism is the fact that those folks on the other side are still there, whether or not you think they're right or wrong or whatever else. And in order for us to move forward as a community, we have to find a way to be in relationship. So it's one thing when I think they are dangerous people and lives are at stake and they have nothing to do with me and I'm just going to do what I have to do. But there's another reality of I'm a rabbi in a synagogue that has very proud Democrats and very proud Republicans. I have people that believe on this side of the political spectrum and this side. I have people that believe in climate change and other people that say there is literally no such thing. I have people that talk about microaggressions and people that think that word is dangerous and harmful to our community. I have people in my community, on all, you name the issue, I've got two sides. And as a rabbi in a community, I love my peoples. These are beautiful peoples. And so my job is not always to decide, who's right and who's wrong, right? My job is to help create a community in which we can hear each other. And I don't have to be persuaded by your argument. But I also need to be able to have lunch with you. I need to be able to come to shul with you. I need to not be disgusted by your presence. And sometimes when we learn to speak in such a strong platform space, it doesn't make room for anybody else. So that's the thing that I'm thinking about, more about the community element of this. And I want to push us beyond the shul too, because it also makes a difference, in our larger community, in our larger family. Here's a little Torah that everybody knows, but then I'm going to tell you a Torah that my holy pastor friend taught me, which stays with me forever. He said, here's this Torah of Shifur and Puah. Shifur and Puah, the famous midwives, right? So the Torah is actually unclear. Are they Egyptian midwives who helped the Hebrews? Or are they Hebrew midwives that helped the Hebrews? A little bit ambiguous in the text. And Rashi tells us that Shifur and Puah were actually Yocheved and Miriam, okay? Moshe's mom and sister. And so that's who Shifra and Puah were. So I was once sitting at lunch with this holy pastor, Pastor Victor Stursky. And Pastor Victor said to me, Rabbi, why do you rabbis always have to go and turn the best Gentiles into Jews? We got nothing left. And I thought it was such a brilliant insight. He's like, these were the best Gentiles, Shifra and Puah. And Rashi has to claim that they're Jewish. By the way, other commentators say, no, they were Egyptian, right? And that was his point. Why do you have to take the best Gentiles and assume, oh, they must have been Jewish? Right? Like you've just taken away something beautiful, something loving, something awesome, some wisdom in other faiths and other cultures. And you say, well, no, it has to be Jewish. We had that idea first, right? And that I think what has really stuck with me, and recognizing that we can find truth, wisdom, beauty, faith in places outside of our own four walls, and it's very important to keep that in mind. I'll show you one other particular moment where this came up for me. I lost a member of my shul over this teaching. You tell me if I was too far out there, Rabbi, and anybody else, but here's the teaching. The binding of Isaac, Akira Yitzchak. The Quran, in the telling of this story, it doesn't use the name of Yitzchak, but in the Quran, there's a question that is asked that's not in the Torah. Avram wakes up from the dream of Elokim Nisat Avraham, of Hashem testing Avram and saying, I need you to bring your son as an offering. And Avram wakes up and he says to Yitzchak, in the mind of the Quran, my son, I have seen myself sacrificing you in a dream. What do you think about that? What a question. What strikes me about this so much is that in the Torah, Avram asks no questions. In the Torah, Avram is silent. He's obedient. In the Quran, it imagines that Avram is wrestling with this request, which in our Midrash, we see that happening. But in the Quran, it imagines that Avram articulates that in the form of a question to his son. So I shared this teaching from the Quran as a way for us to reflect differently on the text. And a woman in my shul got up, hissed, and walked out and never came back. She was a member of the congregation for 10 years, a founding member. And I spoke with her afterwards, and she said to me, Rabbi, how dare you quote the Quran from the pulpit? Okay, so it could be that I stepped too far, that quoting from other sacred texts and treating it alongside some of the Jewish commentaries felt sacrilegious to some people. Maybe I needed to qualify it in a certain kind of way, introduce it in a different kind of way to help people feel comfortable. But I have to say, when I read this text from the Quran, it's like a little bit of Torah for me. Great wisdom, great question, introducing uncertainty into a very ethically complicated story, bringing a humanity to Abraham, and helping me recognize Avram's about to do something so strong. And it means that someone else is going to suffer so much. And being able to introduce question, hesitation, uncertainty, as opposed to, I'm right. And I don't care if you're screaming, you're wrong. I think it's an important Torah for me to hold on to. I don't know if that brings up anything else for you. I want to show you one more piece, and then I'll wrap up and take any other questions, hear other comments. I've shared this a little bit before in Arizona, which is my birthplace. So what are you going to do? But this is me on the day of the dedication of my synagogue in New Orleans, when I served as the rabbi there for 6 years. Our synagogue was destroyed by Hurricane Katrina. And we were housed by a Reformed synagogue for 7 years while we figured out what we were doing, rebuilt our membership, rebuilt our finances, and finally rebuilt our building on land that we purchased from the Reformed synagogue right next door. They had overflow property. We bought it from them. We built the building. And this picture was taken in the background. You could see the Reformed synagogue. And they had our Torahs, and we danced the Torahs. The rabbi and I each, at the beginning of the march, each held one Torah. Then we passed it to others. And we danced it from their sanctuary into our sanctuary, with, of course, an all-female brass band, only in New Orleans. The executive director of the Orthodox Union, who was there, whispered to me in the middle of the ceremony, he's like, I have never seen anything like this before. There were 12 members of the brass band, and he was a little taken by it. So it was really special. But here's the other special picture. This is a picture inside now our sanctuary. It's not the highest quality. I couldn't find the original, but it's hard to tell. But if you look at the right window, the window to the right of the Aron, you'll see that same building in the background. That's the Reformed synagogue. Every time we davened, every time we prayed in that space, we looked out the windows and were reminded of the kindness and the generosity of a community that was not our own, that saved us, that shielded us, that housed us, that loved us for 7 years after Hurricane Katrina, that poured 10 feet of water into our old synagogue and destroyed it. And that we were able to rebuild right here. This is a Torah that I call the Torah of windows in our walls. I insisted that when we built our new synagogue, we built the front wall with windows so we could look out on our brothers and sisters as an Orthodox synagogue into the Reformed synagogue. And I insisted that we could look out because in between the two buildings, right out those windows, was a playground that our two congregations paid for and built together. Spanking brand new, beautiful state-of-the-art playground that sits between the two buildings, has access on both sides. As a statement that we worship differently, we eat a little bit differently, we have lots of different practices, but we are one family. Our children can play together. If you go to New Orleans, you should look at that playground. It is the symbol of you don't have to be wrong in order for me to be right. It's one of the most beautiful spiritual images that I've had the chance to be a part of in my life, and those windows. And it comes for me out of this teaching, which I've shared before, and I want to end with. This is the teaching that when the sea split and the Jewish people walked to the other side, the Midrash says, based on the language, Hamayim lahem chomam, miminam umismolam, that the sea split into 12 paths. And there were walls and walls and walls. Each tribe had their own path, and they were separated by walls. But the Midrash says, not only were there chomot v'chomot, walls and walls, but there were chalonot v'chalonot. There were windows in the walls. This is the Torah of putting windows in our walls. Windows to see our brothers and sisters in the synagogue next door, so that I remember on Yom Kippur that I'm not the only one praying all day. So are a lot of other synagogues of different denominations. That I put windows in my walls and I recognize those who are more vulnerable in my community, those who are looking for a Shabbos meal in my community, those who are outside of my community that I have to recognize and embrace. Thinking whatever those walls are that we put up in our lives, which are needed to protect, to create, to have boundaries, great. But if you don't have windows in your walls because you're so right and they're so wrong and I have nothing to learn or hear from you, I think that's where we fall really short. And I'll just say one last thing, which is, I have a lot of things to say more. So if you have any other questions, but I was just asked yesterday, I got a phone call from somebody getting married, beautiful couple, the sweetest of the souls. And they said to me that she grew up in a conservative synagogue, but the husband's parents want an Orthodox rabbi to do the wedding. And the bride's parents work at a Reform synagogue. So they're looking for an Orthodox rabbi who will do a chuppah with a conservative rabbi and a Reform rabbi. And I was the name that they were given. Would I be willing to lead a chuppah and embrace my Reform and conservative rabbinic friends on either side and celebrate this beautiful family together? Those are the kinds of questions we should be getting. Maybe they shouldn't even be questions anymore, but our doors, our windows should be open enough that people understand that they can call us and create a space where we can live together in harmony as a community. Let me stop there and see if there's any other questions or thoughts or comments, and we'll take it.
Thank you, Rabbi. How do you suggest we start building these windows? Because I think that we're in a culture right now where everything is so like, I'm either for this or against this. I feel like right now we're not even in the time where we're like, let's even talk about building windows, right? Like it's an automatic shutdown. And I'm talking about both, like even like both political sides. Like we're not even ready to even talk to each other. Something that I see in the progressive spaces, which myself and Rev Shmuley are pretty much always in, is we always talk about having tough conversations, but rarely do we actually have them. So how do you suggest that we start to lean into those conversations with folks who sometimes don't even want to listen to us?
Yeah, no, thank you. It's a great question. I'm curious if other people have thoughts on that. This is one of the reasons that when we built our synagogue in New Orleans, I didn't want it to just be lip service to an idea. I demanded windows because sometimes you need visual reminders of the values and the principles that we talk about. If we don't put those visual reminders around ourselves, we forget, first of all. We don't think about it. Sitting on my desk, I can't reach it from here. Is a picture of me and my boys on a trip that we took as a synagogue down to Selma, Alabama on Martin Luther King weekend. And it's a picture of us walking over the bridge together and making sure that we create opportunities as a community to being out there. I on Yom HaShoah, on Holocaust Memorial Day, we took our community down to Whitwell, Tennessee. This was right in the aftermath of the election that year of President Trump. And we were experiencing just tremendous divide and pain. And people kept coming to me in the community, like, how do we create bridges? How do we think through? So, okay, we had to try a lot of different things. But one of the things that we did was I suggested, let's go someplace where we can meet people very different than ourselves. And let's see how other people are navigating some of these questions. And so we went to Whitwell, Tennessee, which is the site of a documentary film, if you haven't seen it, called Paper Clips, where a community in which they said, Rabbi, we have no Jews, no blacks, and no Muslims in this town. That's when they said to me the first time I called. And they started collecting paper clips as a middle school project to try to understand the magnitude of 6 million in the lives lost in the Shoah. They have an unbelievable museum there today, unbelievable. And we took our shul down there, spent Holocaust Memorial Day there, and I actually led a Yom HaShoah Seder at the church in their gym for all the members of the church community and our synagogue community. It was an extraordinary moment of putting windows in our wall. And I'll tell you, that moment, I during the Seder, we asked people to do different rituals. And one of the rituals I asked them was, I'd like you to take off your shoes, your jewelry, your watches, things like that. And we collected it in boxes and took it away from people so they would experience sort of the loss of your valuables. The gentleman in front of me bent down and took off his leg and put it in the box. He was a miner in the coal mines, and he had lost his leg in a mining accident. And I said, whoa, sir, you don't have to take off your leg. He said, Rabbi, you said to take off your shoe. My shoe is connected to my leg. I can't disconnect them easily. So I just took off my leg. It's okay. And I got to tell you, for our community, I'm not living in a place where people are coal miners. I'm not living in a place with people for whom their livelihood and generations of their livelihood is built around that, for good or for bad. But when we went to a place in which people sacrifice limbs of their body for that kind of lifestyle, to put food on the tables, it helped open up a conversation. It helped open up connection and warmth. This wasn't like evil climate killers. This was like the guy taking off his leg at a Yom HaShoah Seder. It's a whole different conversation. Those are the windows that we can put in our walls. And it starts with the words, the prayers, the things that come out of our mouth and our ritual spaces. And it comes down to the practices that we take, as Rav Shmuley was saying, the actions that govern the way that we walk in the world. I just noticed one other comment in the chat, and then maybe we'll wrap up, which was someone said what's so hard to figure out is when to be uniters and when to be agitators, when to embrace emet and when to embrace shalom. Such an important question. And Rav Steve, you said the same thing in many ways before. And one thing that's been really important to me is, we have to be agitators. And we have to raise our voices, and we have to fight for the things that we believe in. We have to do that civilly, in ways that don't create violence and harm. And that's our right, and that's important to do. But at the same time, I think of an idea that was quoted in the name of Rav Kook, which is, it's so important to look at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself, what is the emet and what is the sheker in the Torah that I live? What are the truths that are so dear and central to my thinking? And what are the shekers, the falsehoods, the little things that come in that this too should be reevaluated? Rav Kook believed that in every movement in our community, these two things existed. He was speaking at the time specifically to secular Zionists and religious folks in Israel, and saying to the religious, you have an emet of Torah and religious lifestyle, but you have a sheker. You have no appreciation of the land and what it means to build a state. And he would turn to the secular Zionists and tell them, you have a truth of the land, but you have a sheker. You don't understand the value of Torah. And if everybody could like think once in a while that, you know what, as much as I know that I'm always right, and of course I'm always in the middle, that means sometimes there are truths to what I believe and what I do, but there's got to be places that I have room to improve. That kind of humility, I think, is important to walk around with, even as we climb the fences with our bullhorns. So, shkoyach, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to share a little Torah, to be with you, Rav Shmuley, with Rav Steve, and everybody else. Debbie, thank you for having your screen on and the whole time and being attentive. And Chris, you too. I appreciate it so much.
Rav Uri, it's amazing. You're not only a uniter who holds people of such different viewpoints together so gently and so lovingly, but you also show up in bold ways. I mean, the fact that you flew out here to Arizona to go to detention centers, you know, with us, to sit with them, and me and Rav Uri sit down, and all of a sudden, a woman from Africa starts speaking Hebrew. She's a refugee in prison. She starts speaking Hebrew to Rav Uri, and she explains to him that she was a refugee in Israel, and she was deported, and now she came through the Mexico border into the States, and then she would love the gift of speaking Hebrew with him for their half hour together. It was a remarkable moment, and so Rav Uri is someone who not only holds people together, he shows up and sits with people in inspiring ways. And I give us all the bracha that we continue to do that. We can continue to fight for truth, and we can continue to not demonize those that we think are wrong. And thank you all for joining us. We look forward to continuing our learning. We have a great learning with Rav Yisachar Katz in partnership with Eshel coming up, LGBTQ Torah coming up in these next 3 weeks, 3 amazing sessions. Go check out our newsletters and you will see them. And we look forward to that being our next step.
Thank you, everyone. Even if you couldn't have your cameras on, but thank you, Eddie, for organizing all this too. I appreciate it.